All right, so this is going to be my third Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Second Edition tutorial. Today I want to talk about proficiencies. So there's two classifications of proficiencies. You've got weapon proficiencies and non-weapon proficiencies. Basically, the way it works. So at the beginning of the game, you get a set number to begin with. For weapons, it goes four for a warrior, one for a wizard, two for a priest, and two for a rogue. And essentially, other than the priest, you can pretty much use any weapon you want. Um, there are a few minor exceptions here and there. Obviously, as a wizard, you don't want something too bulky or encumbersome. Most wizards go with like some sort of staff or some sort of thrown weapon, something that they can use from a distance. I've known a lot of wizards to use like miniature hand crossbows. That way they stay out of the main combat. But if they're not currently casting spells, they can still fire off a couple bolts for, some piddly amount of damage, but enough to kind of distract the enemy a little bit. Um, Priests are restricted based on their deity. Um, these restrictions can be stuff like certain deities won't allow edged weapons, or certain deities will only allow weapons that aren't that are for like harvesting. My brain stopped there for a second. But yeah, it'll be stuff like that. Sometimes under the warrior category, paladins are restricted like this. Again, depending on the ethos and whatnot. And I'm probably butchering some of these words, so forgive me. But that being said, you also gain more weapon proficiencies as you level up. For a warrior class, it's one every three levels, so 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, yada yada. For wizards, it's one every six levels. For priests, it's one every four. And for rogues, it's one every four. Now, the way I handle this in my games is your starting weapons. If you like with warriors, you don't have to start out trained in all four. If you want to, you can do like say, okay, I'm proficient in longsword, longbow, and battle axe, right? Just as an example, and then hold that fourth spot empty, so that if you come to an encampment or a town and there's some weapon master there, if your DM allows it, that's proficient in something that you don't already know, and it's a place that you're going to return to periodically, like kind of like a hub town. You can, in your downtime, train with that person, and then over the course of several sessions, become proficient in that weapon. I've done this for several characters just because, and this goes with your ones you gain as you advance. I don't like the character just, oh, all of a sudden I know how to use longbow, or all of a sudden I know how to use pole arm. To me, that's boring. I like a little flavor to that. So even like when a wizard hits level six, he may have like say the rogue in the party is really good at throwing daggers, right? He's already proficient in them. So the wizard over the next couple adventures and stuff, whenever they're resting, could have the rogue train him in how to use throwing daggers, so that after a couple months of that or a couple nights of that, he becomes proficient enough to consider himself proficient in throwing daggers, and so on. Now with non-weapon proficiencies, these I handle a little bit differently, because this is your stuff like art, writing, singing, dancing, swimming, rock climbing, basic survival skills, anything that you can possibly think of that your character might know how to do. From something as simple as foraging for edible, food, like stuff that's safe to eat, all the way up to, blacksmithing. Like all of that is covered under non weapon proficiencies. And again, you get a certain number right off the bat. Warriors and rogues only get 3. Wizards and priests both get 4. Supposed to be because of their schooling and whatnot in order to attain those abilities and whatnot. And again, you get more as you go up. Everybody except for the rogue gets 1 every 3 levels. The rogue gets 1 every 4 levels. And mostly for that on the rogue, it's because most rogues, their non-weapon proficiencies are more attuned to just boosting the skills they already have. They're not very scholarly. They're not going to go out and learn ancient history or anything like that because they don't need it. If it's not going to earn them a buck, they don't need it. But with the non-weapon proficiencies, your initial non-weapon proficiencies are things you learned before coming of age. Because most adventurers are adults, depending on the species, the race, human, elf, dwarf, whatever. It'll depend on how old you are when you begin your life as an adventurer. So, for instance, let's just use humans because again, D&D is kind of racist, sort of, where humans are the baseline. But with humans, usually around the age of 18 or so is when you first leave home. And usually it's to find work because most PCs, are usually adventurers for the sake of earning money or fame, or what I'm saying, like fame and fortune. That's basically the gist of it. Sometimes your character's reason for going might be something like a revenge mission. It might be, depending on how in detail you want to go, but most people go with the baseline. I decided to become a mercenary and then this happened. Like it's a very easy story to tell. Not that it's a bad story, it's just easy for most people to go ahead and say, this is my story. So, any non weapon proficiencies that a human would have would be stuff they learned by the age of 18 for their base. And typically, this is like, my dad's a jeweler in the town we grew up in. So from him, I learned how to make jewelry. Meanwhile, my mom taught me everything she knew about survival. And old man Marcus down the road taught me all about ancient history. So my 3 starting non-weapon proficiencies are ancient history, foraging, or survival, and jewelry crafting. You know what I'm saying? Something like that. But then as you gain levels and you learn new ones, again, I don't like it just to be like, oh, hey, I now know how to do this. I like it to be explained, like, by level 3, say, my character's been paying really close attention to all the stonework and everything the dwarf has been talking about stonework, right? So now I have a baseline understanding of stonemasonry. So my level 3 that I gain is that. All of a sudden I'm, able to look at it and see all the details that the dwarf was talking about and be like, oh, when the dwarf mentioned this, and find, whatever's up with it, like who crafted it or whatever, based on that. I like that better than just saying, oh, I'm level 3 now, all of a sudden I learned how to dance. But why? You know what I mean? Okay, so anyway, obviously the biggest issue with this is that training takes time. But if you work it into your story to where it's like, oh, when I'm in camp, so and so is telling me everything about his past, or when I'm in camp, that mercenary that's been running with us, he's teaching me how to use this weapon. That way, when you hit those level milestones and you can say, okay, I have now trained long enough, and boom, I'm proficient in it. The biggest thing about second edition versus other editions later is your checks for like using, and I use that term loosely, your proficiencies are a little different. With weapons, Pretty much, if you're proficient with a weapon, it just means that you get your bonus when using that weapon. So, like, if you have a strength of 18, I believe it's a +4 with melee weapons. So, like, if I'm proficient with a longsword and I swing it, I get a +4 to hit. All right, because I'm proficient in it. If I'm using, say, I don't know, a battle axe that I'm not proficient with, I won't get that bonus. And if it's a typically difficult weapon, like say a pole arm that I just picked up, I may even be penalized, like a -2 to hit, because it's something I'm not familiar with. And if it's a very exotic weapon, like um, let's say you've got a warrior who's proficient in longsword, like he knows swords, right? But he picks up like I don't know, a pair of tonfas. You know, obviously he's not going to be very skilled with those. So he might get like a -4 with them, unless it's like, okay, I'm using them as clubs. And then it's like, okay, if you're just going to hit them over the head with them, okay, a -2 to hit. Because you still kind of, it's just a big piece of wood, you know? And this goes with like what's called improvised weaponry as well. And improvised weapons are literally anything that you grab to hit an opponent with. The prime example for that is if you're in a bar fight and you grab a nearby bar stool and smash your opponent over the head with it. Obviously, you're not going to do as much damage or hit as perfectly as you would with, your warhammer that you use. Um, or something like that, you know? So that's the thing with the improvised weapons is literally anything that you pick up, you're going to have a -2 to hit with it, and you're going to do less damage with it. Um, and as far as the non-weapon proficiency go, you can still do stuff. Like let's use a good example. Okay, swimming, right? Proficiency in swimming is like an Olympic swimmer. Somebody that knows the ins and outs and can swim for long periods without breaks, and is basically like a fish in the water, like somebody that knows what they're doing. That doesn't mean that your average person can't swim. The difference is if you have a proficiency in it. Let's say we have an adventuring party that's trying to swim across a small river or whatever, right? It's just a couple feet across. It's nothing too dangerous. There is a bit of a current, right? So the rogue has proficiency in swimming. He goes across just fine, no trouble whatsoever. The wizard has proficiency, but he's also wearing his heavy robes. So he makes it across, but has a little bit of difficulty with it because of the weight of his robes and the fact that, now he's soaking wet with this heavy robe on, right? Then let's say the priest goes. He has no proficiency, but he's wearing light armor as well. So he makes it across the river, but it takes him a little while, and it's a little more difficult with him, and it's more of like a doggy paddle than anything. Then you have the warrior come along, wearing heavy plate mail, trying to get across this river. Obviously, he can't make it. If he were to even attempt to swim, he would probably drown due to the weight of his armor. So, in his case, he would probably have to get the rogue to the other side with rope, have him shoot an arrow back across the river, grab that, and then have the rest of the party pull him across the river. Kind of lay on his armor and just have them drag him across. Would it be difficult? Yes, because now you're talking strength checks for everybody on the other side, and those are your three weakest members. But this is a good example of the differences in the proficiencies. Now, there are other ways around it. This is just an example, right? Same goes for climbing a wall or haggling. It's like if you're proficient at speechcraft, then yeah, you're going to be like, how about we take this price down a little bit? And the shopkeeper's going to be like, yeah, sure. If you're not proficient, you're going to be like, but the guy down the road is cheaper, and he's gonna be like, then go down the freaking road, you know? Like it's not gonna work for you. But again, it's something that is trained. So like if say the rogue is a really good talker, right? And the paladin is always watching him. When the paladin hits level 3, he can be like, I've studied him enough that I am really good at this. But that being said, let's talk about one of my least and most favorite problems to deal with. Um, Encumbrance, food and drink, and money. So there's a chart in the Dungeon Master's Guide for the difference between copper, silver, gold, platinum, and electrum. Okay, I am not a fan of the way they wrote it. It makes it more complicated than it really is. I do it all in terms of a single copper piece. All right, and essentially what I do is one copper is the base. One silver is equal to 10 copper. One gold is 10 silver or 100 copper, and so on. Up to the electrum being the equivalent of 10,000 copper. And the reason I do it this way is because if you use tens, it's quicker math. So you can just kind of be like, okay, this is what I have. I've got 10 of these. This is how much money it is in copper. To me, that's just the easier way to handle it. As far as encumbrance and food and drink, there are rules in the book about carrying too much weight in your backpack or on your person or whatever. I kind of chuck those rules to the side. For me, if you're not getting crazy with it, if you're not walking around with an entire armory in your backpack, then sure, you're fine. If you've got a couple extra changes of clothing, think about it like hiking in the real world, right? You've got a backpack. You've got a lot of stuff in that. You might have a tent. You might have a small camp stove, a couple changes of clothes, some waterproof bags, first aid kit, rope, pittance, or however you say that word, a small shovel, like a little hand axe, whatever. All that's going to be in your backpack. Is it heavy? Yes, but you can still move with it. So, like, you can pack a lot of stuff into a backpack and still carry it around. But, like I say, if you're not getting crazy with it, fine, whatever. As far as food and drink go, to me, it's an assumption. We know that the party, it's kind of like using the restroom. We know that these characters are going to go to the bathroom at some point. Do we have to discuss it every time? No. Do we have to, it's like, do we have to say, oh, we sat down and ate? No. It's assumed. You stopped for a break, eat a meal. Problem solved. Like, I don't do the whole, oh, it's been 3 weeks and nobody has said they've eaten or drinking anything. You're all dying from starvation. That is so stupid, in my opinion. But it's one of those, like, I see a lot of DMs do that, and I feel like in this era, it's kind of a Dark Souls thing where it's like, oh, let's just punish them for not saying something or not doing something just right. Why? The point's to have fun. The point of all of D&D is to have fun. That being said, let's make one of the most difficult parts of D&D really fun. Let's talk about combat. So the way I handle combat is one round of combat lasts 20 turns. And the way I do this is, by turns I mean when a person acts. So everybody rolls a d20. And then they subtract from that their dexterity modifier. Unless, armor and whatnot, and it'll be a different number. But whatever their overall dexterity modifier is, they subtract that from what they roll. Then I say 1. Everybody that got a 1 goes on 1, 2, 3, so on. And of course, I roll for my monsters, and whatever number they get, they go on that. And typically with monsters, what I'll do is, let's say I've got a party of, let's say I've got a party of 4, one of each: wizard, warrior, rogue, priest, right? and they're fighting 4 goblins. What I'll do is I'll roll one number for all the goblins and say that's the turn they're going on. This is just a simplicity thing for me. Now, if I've got, let's say it's 4 goblins, a goblin chieftain, and a goblin shaman, then I would roll 3 different numbers: one for the goblins, one for the chieftain, one for the shaman. Just to make things simpler, it cuts down. If you're sitting here, especially in some bigger battles, where you've got like 20 or 30 enemies coming at you, it gets tedious if they're not all acting on the same turn. Um, my brain stopped working for a second. But yeah, so I mean, proficiencies, encumbrance, money, and combat. D&D can be a very complicated game. One thing that you've got to keep in mind is it's okay to cut corners to make it simpler. Anybody that's starting out for the first time, or trying to teach their kids or whatever, try to find one of the so-called red boxes. Um, it's a very simple. The way it's set up, you by yourself can play through it. If you've never played the game, you can sit down with the adventure book, I think it's called, and play through an entire campaign and learn everything you need to know about the game. It's very, very, very detailed explanations. Then you can take that knowledge and pass it on to a child. There's nothing like it's. I think the red boxes are listed for ages 5 and up. It's I think 1 to 5 players for the way the baseline set up, or something like that. But it honestly, that is, if I can give any piece of advice, that's the one piece of advice. Start with a red box. Try to find that, play through it. Honestly, if you have any questions after playing through a red box, there are so many D&D communities online that can easily help you understand any problems you're having. And if you're seeing this video and you have any questions for me directly, hopefully I figured out the comment problem and I turned them on below. If I did, comment below. If I didn't, I am so sorry. I'm still trying to figure this YouTube thing out. This is only my 3rd video. Let me know what you guys think.